So if you're working in or with the recruiting function, one of the things that you need to make sure you stay on top of is your pipeline quality. So in today's lesson, we're going to walk through how to actually analyze your pipeline quality using AI tools so you don't have to go into the detail and think about restructuring the data and everything else. So we're going to walk you through step by step how to do it. You'll see things like which pipelines are potentially at risk, what your kind of pipeline health is overall, and any recs that you may be struggling to close. We'll come up with some suggestions on how to improve them and recommendations moving forward. We'll then wrap up with a overview of actually how to turn this into a clean deck that you may want to present to one of your stakeholders, one of your senior leaders, or even more broadly to the team as you're thinking about how to rectify the situation. So let's dig into the lesson. So this is in the Applied HR course, and we're going to go to the Read the Story in Your Pipeline from Module 2. And so what we're going to walk through here is the full step-by-step process. I'm going to use Claude, and I'm using the app for the Mac. So use whatever tool you have. The features should be the same. The output is just going to be slightly different. So I'm going to walk you through how I do this and the prompts that I'm going to use with Claude. So first thing we're going to do is actually get hold of our ATS data. Now, if you don't have it, you're just using this as a way to level up, then please use the sample pipeline data. I've already downloaded it into our local drive here, but if you've got Greenhouse or Lever or Ashby or whatever, there should be a very easy process for you to go in and see your active pipelines for all active recs right now. And you just want to download that ATS data so that we can actually run it through the AI. You may already have this built into your ATS. If so, that's fantastic. You can use the same prompts with your pipeline data there, and it's going to give you the same kind of outputs. We're going to kind of walk through that whole end-to-end process so you can really understand what's going on within a few minutes and actually make recommendations for where to go moving forward. So turning you from a person who understands what's happening in the pipeline to really a strategic leader who's driven by data. So the data you need, make sure you've got candidate ID, requisition, current stage, date entered each stage, and the outcome at each stage as well. This should all be written in the ATS. We've created the sample set because every ATS is slightly different. I didn't want to index over to one particular data set. If you do have any trouble with this, just drop a question into the course community section. We'll see if we can answer it there. Just so if anyone else has the same problem, they can actually see that too. So the first thing we're going to do is load our data into Claude. I'm going to get this running so that we can then talk through what the data looks like. But we're going to upload the file directly into our app. So this should be uploaded in the CSV right now. So while this runs through the process of analyzing, let's go through the actual data set itself. I'm going to pull up the data. So you can see here we have a sample ATS data set. We have all of the fields that we would have wanted, candidate ID, departments. We're looking at the rec ID to make sure they're all unique. We're looking at last activity, outcome. So basically all the data that you would expect to put into an ATS. But if we scroll down, you can see we have about 500 data points in here. So we're going to expect to see that when we look at the analysis. We also have different stages, different applications. Now, normally, if I was building this from scratch, what I would do is actually turn this into a pivot table, break out each rec, maybe build some tables that are actually going to communicate to me the kind of health of each pipeline. It's probably going to take a few hours to get that set up. Once it's set up, it's actually quite easy to refresh. But the benefit of using AI is that we can actually do that very quickly just by dropping the pipeline data into our tool. One point to note is if you are using this with a personal version, that data may not be protected. So make sure that if this is part of your job, you're actually getting the corporate governance guidelines approved beforehand so that you're not going to release data to a public data set. So yep, it picked up all 498 unique candidates. It picked up 12 open requisitions across 6 departments. We can QA that to make sure this is as we thought, and this is actually a really good kind of process to go through just in case you find there's any recs that are open that shouldn't have been opened. You can see the different pipeline stages, and it's already started to do some analysis for us. So the date range is 6 months from last year pretty much, and a couple of data quality flags. So this is helpful. And now what we're going to do is move ahead with the actual analysis stage of it. So the next step is to run the funnel analysis. I'm going to get this started and we'll talk through what we're actually doing here. So I'm just going to paste the prompt directly into this. This is the copy and paste element. So we're going to come to more advanced stuff later. But for each role in the data set, we want to calculate total candidates, conversion rate, biggest drop-off point, average days in each stage, and any candidates that are currently stuck. And what this allows us to do is actually create a quick snapshot of all of our requisitions and look at which are healthy, and we've defined them based on healthy is conversion rates are within range. A watch category is something where one metric is outside of the standard range. So we're just using the data that we have to set those ranges. So everything's going to be normalized based on what is typical within this 6-month snapshot. Obviously, if you've got a much bigger data set, you can actually build those ranges or define those ranges more clearly. It might take a little while to actually get those set up if you're setting ranges based on role type, based on department and everything else. But by actually averaging based on the data that we have, we can just look for kind of any kind of outliers, which is normally a kind of a quick analysis that an analyst would do. But as a TA or HR leader, you can actually run this very quickly yourself. And so we're going to define the normal ranges based on the overall data set averages. And now we're starting to see some data come out within our app. So let's have a look at what we're saying. Overall hire rate is 1.2%. So from 498 candidates, we made 6 hires. That makes sense. It seems low, but for anyone that's worked with inbound funnels before, this is probably not too far from the truth. We have 12 open requisitions currently. And then we're looking at the global average conversion rates between each stage of the funnel, an average dwell time between each stage. So just looking at this before we actually get the data back on the additional channels, I think what's interesting is just looking at the dwell time for the business days. We see that from apply to screen, we're looking at 3 days. Recruit screen is about 5 days in stage, hiring manager 5 days. Technical screen is closer to 8 days. That makes sense, maybe with some scheduling. But the on-site interview, that's interesting. It's 16 days. That's more than 2 weeks of a candidate actually sitting in the on-site phase. That to me is a huge risk, because the longer you have these final round candidates in process, the more time they have to accept an offer elsewhere. So that's probably something that I'm going to want this to pick up on. Just based on my knowledge, that's something that I would be concerned about. But let's see how we are here. So we can see we've kind of built this pipeline out. We have the health. Well, actually most of our recs are at risk or at least watch. And it gives us the flags here for things to look at. So, the dwell time is helpful. So the biggest call out here is we're looking at the overall average for everything across the board. So for 500 candidates, we have global averages. Now, what's helpful here is we're actually going into each individual rec and seeing how the performance of that rec compares to the global average. So actually breaking out like this using this prompt is a really good way to see which of your pipelines are potentially challenging. And then from here, we can see what are we actually going to do about it. So our product analyst is a nice easy one. We've got one stuck candidate. I would be flagging that for follow-up immediately. Why is that candidate stuck? Can we actually do something to rectify that? And then for the rest of them, there are risks. So we probably want to get into a little bit more detail on that. And it actually goes into that analysis here. So three patterns worth naming: onsite-to-hire wall. Actually, this is potentially related to the dwell time for onsite that I was calling out earlier. Marcus Webb's recs are slow. So one engineering manager seems maybe to be delaying the time it takes for them to review their pipeline. Top of funnel quality is a thing. If we're seeing a large number of candidate applicants, but very few of them actually get into recruiter screen, potentially that means that we're actually not very clearly articulating what's required in this role, or we have an opportunity to reduce top of funnel slightly, or maybe retarget top of funnel so we can improve that rate. I'd say just from looking at this from my experience, it's actually not that far from reality. We normally see very high top of funnel, especially if we open to public postings, and it's very hard to actually whittle that down, which is why a lot of people are using AI now to actually help with resume reviews. 3 stuck candidates need immediate action, so that's something that would flag straight away. So, let's say that you're doing this as your kind of weekly assessment of current pipeline rec. I'm going to get on Slack immediately, figuring out which recruiters are managing those recs, and trying to understand what's stopping these candidates from moving forward, and can I actually reduce that friction as a recruiting leader. Okay, so we have that analysis done. Now let's dig into the story a little bit more and figure out, okay, what are we actually going to do about this? So I'm going to copy this third prompt, drop it in, and then we'll look at what we're actually trying to do here. So based on the analysis that we've just done, so you can see that just took a few minutes for Claude to actually run through that whole process. What are the top 3 pipeline problems across all the roles? Where should I be focusing my energy? For each problem, what can we hypothesize about what's causing that, and one specific actionable recommendation for each problem. Now, this is going to give you the Gen AI recommendation. So as a recruiting leader, as a HR leader, you're probably going to take that recommendation and actually refine it based on what you know and bring in your corporate knowledge. So this is where you're using AI to empower the decision, not to make the decision for you. And this is going to give us at least something to think about, or maybe avenues to investigate that we may not have thought about. So without going into too much depth here, we're seeing three main problems. On-site-to-hire ratio is a big problem. So maybe we'll pull the on-site rejection reasons and figure out where we're seeing gaps. Two of the hiring managers are creating time and stage problems. So why is that the case? Maybe we institute a 48-hour SLA. I can speak from experience. I've implemented something like that, and that has been a huge boost. The trick there is to not go directly to the hiring manager to implement that SLA, but actually to flag this to senior leadership and let them know that their hiring is at risk because of specific bottlenecks in the chain. And here's the data to support it. Here's what we want to do about it. So problem 3 is data scientists and staff data engineers sourcing from the wrong pools. This is kind of clear because of the low application to recruiter screen ratio. So let's think through how we actually targeting these roles. So if I'm doing this as my weekly cycle, here's my 3 big things that I want to focus on this morning. This is what I'm going to kind of chase up with my leadership team and try and figure out how do we actually progress this. So we're kind of stack ranking the problems. We're using data to highlight which ones are the kind of the biggest risks. We're coming up with very specific actionable recommendations, and we can spend less time actually analyzing this and actually more time getting to work to figure out what's going on there. So we have that very, very quickly. We've run the whole analysis. I'm going to read the output, and we're then going to figure out how do we actually influence people to make that decision. So there's one more thing I'm going to touch on, and we're actually going to get to this in module 3, which is a little bit more about how do you communicate this data. But given we already have a free resource on the 3-slide executive data template, which you can download, and this is going to give us the additional prompts. Now, the prompts here actually go through to a slide deck. So what I'm going to do is scroll down, and this is in one of our previous YouTube videos. So everyone has access to this. What you can do is actually take this prompt here, which is going to take this analysis that we've just done and convert it into a 3-slide brief. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to paste it into here. Now, a couple of things to change. This is based on a workflow that we actually did live. So it's not a recruiting capacity analysis, it's a recruiting pipeline analysis. So we're going to change that into a 3-slide executive decision brief. That's exactly what we want. So we don't want a 10-slide, 15-minute presentation. We want 3 slides, very punchy. This is what we're seeing. This is what we should do next. And we're not pasting data in here. We've already got the data in the chat. So we just use the data from this chat. And then we're going to let that run. So what we're going to do instead is actually just look at the decision brief that I already did in the practice run through. And we can see what we're actually calling out here. So 3 slides, that's all you need to make a recommendation. And then you can go into the detail with the analysis that we've done. We have the supporting data behind that. Obviously, the more comfortable you get, the more supporting data you're going to have. But really think through what is the recommendation you're making and what is the data to support that and what is the cost of actually not following this recommendation. So recommendation up front, bluff, bottom line up front, mandate a 48-hour hiring manager response, SLAs across 12 open recs by June 30th. So this is what you're going to say to your senior leadership in order to fix this problem where we're losing candidates in the pipeline because hiring managers are taking too long to get their scorecards in or make decisions. And so these are the recommendations by each team. So TA lead has to audit all the candidates that were lost. The engineering directors will clear the backlog, and the HRBPs will recalibrate the screening criteria so that we're not rejecting a whole bunch of people top of funnel. So very clear recommendation. Who's going to do it? What are they going to do? We're doing it by June 30th, and that's our deadline. Supporting data. Again, this is all created by Claude, so we don't have to do any of this. This is just showing the kind of pipeline. But from 500 candidates, we've only hired 6. And so we want to increase that number. And 7 of the 12 roles have had on-sites, but we've not had any offers. So there's clearly a kind of a gap in the system here. And so this is what we're trying to solve for. Again, if you're working with a data-driven leader, they're probably going to want to go into a little bit more depth with this. But having this data up front and then being able to drill down is really a superpower at this stage. And the cost of not filling these roles, you've got 8 unfilled roles. It's 160 to 240K per vacancy for every 3 months that these remain unfilled. So you can see the math here, 8 roles, $20,000 to $30,000 each. We're spending $250,000 on an unoptimized recruiting pipeline. when we could fix it in a couple of weeks with a bit of concerted effort. We've already lost 49 candidates. So not only are they not going to come and work for us, but let's assume that they were strong candidates and they've taken offers elsewhere, probably with our competitors. So there's kind of like a double negative impact there. And 0 of the 4 active candidates will not convert unless we do an immediate recruiter follow-up. So if we implement this recommendation, we're going to save up to $250,000. We're going to lose fewer candidates to our competitors, and we're going to convert potentially 4 candidates who otherwise wouldn't, that are currently in the pipeline. So it's a very quick, very snappy recommendation that we can make. But this is the kind of full module. So hopefully this was helpful. Next, we're actually going to go into lesson 3, where we're actually going to look at how do we use this data and build on it to actually diagnose what's happening in the pipeline, do more kind of like flow analysis, and actually get a little bit deeper into how to fix things. So if you think this is kind of surface level, what's happening in our pipeline, how can we solve the problem? We're then going to go deeper and actually really get into the weeds and fix the problem at the root cause, so that we're building a better system in the future that's going to stand up to more scrutiny. So we'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you.